Blood sprayed across the polished hospital floor before the explosion even registered. The trembling young nurse they'd all dismissed, the one they called the mouse, the one they wouldn't let near critical patients, was already moving toward the source of the blast while decorated surgeons dove under desks. Her hands, steady as iron, reached for the debris, trapping a dying man beneath twisted metal and shattered glass. And in that split second, Dr. Marcus Holloway, the physician who'd humiliated her an hour earlier, saw something in her eyes that made his stomach drop. This wasn't the scared probationary nurse he'd mocked. This was someone else entirely, someone trained for catastrophe, someone who'd seen worse than this. Before we dive into what happens next, I need you to do something. Stay with me until the very end of this story. Drop a like, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all started. The emergency department at Crestview Memorial Hospital in Millbrook never truly slept, but the 2 a.m. lull made everything feel suspended in amber. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their sickly glow across linoleum floors buffed to an unnatural shine. In the stillness, every sound amplified. The distant beep of monitors, the rustle of scrubs, the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished tile. Sarah Winters moved through that silence like she'd been designed for it. At 29, she possessed the kind of forgettable face that supervisors' eyes slid right past during morning briefings. Mousy brown hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail, pale green eyes that rarely made direct contact, a frame so slight that orderlies occasionally mistook her for a volunteer. She'd been at Crestview for 6 months, still wearing the yellow probationary badge that marked her as untested, unproven, not quite real. The surgical nurses had stopped learning her name after the 3rd week. "Hey, you," Dr. Marcus Holloway called from the physician's lounge, not bothering to look up from his phone. "Coffee's empty." Sarah paused in the doorway, medication tray balanced against her hip. "I can make a fresh pot after now would be better." She set the tray down carefully and moved to the coffee station. Her hands didn't shake. They never did, actually, but nobody had bothered to notice that particular detail about her. Marcus Holloway was 42.
And knew it, biding the descent with expensive haircuts and a gym membership he actually used. Chief of Emergency Medicine, 3 published papers, a reputation for diagnostic brilliance that he wore like armor over the personality defects everyone pretended not to see. He'd been at Crestview for 8 years, and in that time he'd cultivated the kind of authority that made junior staff hesitate before contradicting him. "You're the new one?" he said, still scrolling through his phone. "Winters?" "Yes, doctor." "Trauma background some. Civilian or military?" Sarah measured coffee grounds with precision. "Doesn't matter. Civilian then?" Marcus finally glanced up, his expression dismissive. "Thought so. You've got that look." "What look?" "Like you learned everything from textbooks." He stood, straightening his white coat. "Real trauma isn't like the simulation, sweetheart. When it matters, you'll freeze. They always do." Sarah handed him the fresh cup. "I'll keep that in mind. See that you do." He walked out and Sarah returned to her medication tray. Her face remained neutral, practiced, empty of reaction, but her jaw tightened just slightly, a micro-expression that vanished before anyone could catch it. The overnight charge nurse, Patricia Wade, materialized beside her with the territorial instinct of someone defending their space from an outsider. Patricia had been at Crestview for 16 years, accumulating seniority the way other people collected grievances. "Don't take it personally," Patricia said, though her tone suggested Sarah absolutely should. "Dr. Holloway's brilliant, saved more lives than you've seen in your entire career. He's earned the right to be direct." "Of course. And between us?" Patricia lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Probationary nurses who make waves don't usually make it past review. Just saying." Sarah nodded, filed that thread away with all the others, and continued her rounds. The emergency department occupied the entire ground floor of Crestview Memorial's main tower. State-of-the-art equipment, private rooms for VIP patients who paid premium rates to avoid the indignity of curtain spaces, a helicopter pad on the roof for the kind of emergencies that made hospital administrators salivate over the prestige. Everything gleamed with the particular cleanliness of an institution that charged accordingly. In room 7, Sarah found an elderly woman sleeping fitfully, her breathing shallow
and uneven. The chart identified her as Dorothy Mitchell, 73, admitted 6 hours earlier with chest pains, preliminary tests inconclusive, awaiting cardiology consult in the morning. Sarah checked the monitors. Heart rate elevated, blood pressure climbing, oxygen saturation dropping gradually but steadily. She stepped into the hallway and flak-bound Patricia. "Mrs. Mitchell's presenting signs of..." "She's stable," Patricia cut her off. "Cardiology will see her at 7. Don't wake Dr. Holloway for every little fluctuation. He needs his rest. Her stats are trending wrong." Then noted in the chart, Patricia's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "That's what probationary nurses do. They document, they don't diagnose." Sarah returned to room 7 and added her observations to the digital record. Her handwriting in the narrative section was clean, precise, clinical. No editorializing, just facts that someone might read later and wonder why nobody acted sooner. At 2:47 a.m., the VIP lounge doors opened. The VIP lounge was Crestview's concession to wealth and influence, a tastefully decorated waiting area with leather chairs, ambient lighting, and a coffee bar that served actual espresso instead of the cafeteria's burnt sludge. It existed in the liminal space between public emergency department and private care, reserved for patients whose insurance plans came with Roman numerals or whose last names appeared on hospital wings. Robert Castellan emerged from that space looking like death in a tailored suit. 61 years old, real estate developer. 3 buildings in downtown Millbrook bore his name. His wife followed a step behind, her face tight with worry that she'd been trained since birth not to show too obviously in public. Sarah noticed him immediately, not because of who he was. She'd never heard the name Castellan before that moment, but because of how he moved. Shuffling steps, one hand pressed against his chest, breathing too fast and too shallow. The overhead lights caught the sheen of sweat on his forehead. She set down the supply cart and approached. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" Castellan waved her off. "Fine, just tired, been here too long." But his neck veins bulged like cables under tension. His lips held the faintest blue tinge around the edges, and when Sarah got close enough, she heard the wheeze beneath his words. Not the normal exhaustion of a long night, but something mechanical and wrong. "Mr. Castellan, I think you should sit down."
"I'm leaving." He took another step and wobbled. His wife caught his elbow. Sarah moved to his other side. "Please, just for a moment." Something in her voice made him pause. Not commanding, exactly, but absolutely certain. He lowered himself into the nearest chair, and Sarah immediately noted how he leaned forward, unable to sit back fully. Classic positioning for someone whose body was screaming for oxygen it couldn't process. She'd seen this before, not in textbooks. "How long have you been having trouble breathing?" Not. "The truth, please." Castellan met her eyes, and whatever he saw there made him hesitate. "Started about an hour ago. Thought it was anxiety. Hospitals make me nervous." "Any chest pain? Some pressure radiating to your jaw or arm?" "A little." Sarah glanced at his wife. "When did you arrive tonight?" 10 o'clock. Robert was having palpitations. They ran tests, said everything looked normal, told us to wait for the attending to discharge him. 4 hours in the VIP lounge. 4 hours while something catastrophic brewed inside him. Sarah straightened. "Wait here. Don't move." She found Marcus Holloway in the physician's lounge, halfway through a sandwich, reviewing patient files on his tablet. "Dr. Holloway." "What?" He didn't look up. "The patient in the VIP lounge, Robert Castellan. He's in acute distress. Jugular vein distension, labor cyanosis around the mouth. I think he's developing cardiac tamponade." Now Marcus looked up. His expression cycled through irritation, disbelief, and something close to amusement. "You think?" "Yes. Based on your extensive diagnostic experience?" "Based on his presentation." Marcus set down his tablet with exaggerated care. "Let me explain something to you, Winters. Robert Castellan had a full cardiac workup 3 hours ago. EKG normal, troponin levels normal, chest x-ray clear. 3 different physicians examined him. You really think you know better than all of them combined?" "I think something's changed." "Of course something's changed. He's been sitting in a waiting room for 4 hours. He's tired and stressed." Marcus stood, his posture radiating the kind of condescension that made small people feel smaller. "Here's what's actually happening. You're a probationary nurse trying to look important by manufacturing a crisis. I've seen it 100 times. Young nurses who watch too much Grey's Anatomy and think they're going to be heroes." Sarah's voice remained level. "I'm asking you to examine him, and I'm telling you to go
back to your station and do your actual job, which, in case you forgot, does not include diagnosis." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This is your first warning. Next time you interrupt me with amateur dramatics, it goes in your file. Are we clear?" Behind them, Patricia Wade had materialized in the doorway, her face arranged in an expression of sympathetic disapproval. Sympathy for Marcus, disapproval for Sarah. "Crystal," Sarah said. She walked away, her footsteps measured and even. Nothing in her posture suggested defeat or submission, just compliance, the appearance of knowing her place. But her hands clenched briefly at her sides, a movement so quick and controlled that it barely qualified as a gesture. Back at her station, Sarah pulled up Robert Castellan's file and read through the earlier examinations. Everything documented as normal. Textbook presentations. No red flags that would have alarmed a competent physician working from standard protocols, except the patient himself was deteriorating in real time. She checked the clock, 3:04 a.m. Then she did something that probably violated hospital policy, but definitely violated the unspoken rules of her position.
She printed a copy of her observations, time-stamped them, and tucked them into her personal notebook. Not the official chart, her own record, just in case. At 3:17 a.m., Sarah made another pass through the VIP lounge. Castellan had deteriorated further. Now he couldn't speak without gasping. His wife hovered beside him, her earlier composure cracking like old paint. "Someone needs to help him," she said when Sarah approached. "Please, I've notified the attending physician." "Then notify him again." Sarah crouched beside Castellan's chair. His pulse was thready and rapid beneath her fingers. His skin had taken on a grayish cast in the ambient lighting. "Mr. Castellan, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're experiencing a medical emergency. Your body is telling you something is very wrong and you need immediate intervention. Do you understand?" He managed a weak nod. "Good. I'm going to get help." "You already tried," his wife said bitterly. "Then I'll make them listen." She walked back to the physician's lounge with the same measured pace, but this time something had changed in her bearing. The slight
hunch of her shoulders had straightened. The downward cast of her eyes had lifted. Marcus was still reviewing files, Patricia beside him, discussing staffing schedules for next week. "Dr. Holloway!" Jesus Christ. He slammed his tablet down. "What now?" "Robert Castellan is dying." The word hung in the air like a grenade. "Excuse me?" "He's in acute cardiovascular collapse. If you don't examine him in the next 5 minutes, he's going to arrest. And when he does, every decision you made tonight becomes part of the record." Patricia gasped. "How dare you speak to—" But Marcus had gone very still, his eyes locked on Sarah's face. Later, he tried to explain what he saw there. Not fear or desperation or the theatrical panic of someone exaggerating for effect. Something else, something calm and absolutely certain. "You're making a very serious accusation," he said quietly. "I'm making an observation. What you do with it is your decision. But if you choose not to act, I want that choice documented." It was the last part that did it. Not the medical details, not the urgency, the implication that his inaction would have a paper trail. "Fine," Marcus snapped. "Let's go prove you wrong." They walked to the VIP lounge together, Patricia trailing behind like a lawyer preparing to take notes for the disciplinary hearing. But the moment Marcus saw Robert Castellan, his expression changed. Years of training took over. He moved forward, his hands already reaching for Castellan's wrist, while his eyes cataloged the visible symptoms. The swollen neck veins, the labored breathing, the positional dyspnea, all the things that hadn't been there 3 hours ago when the initial workup came back clean. "Get me a portable ultrasound," Marcus said, his voice stripped of his earlier condescension. "Now." Patricia rushed off. Sarah stayed exactly where she was. Marcus performed a quick examination, his movements efficient but increasingly urgent. When the ultrasound arrived, he ran it across Castellan's chest and went pale. "Pericardial effusion," he muttered. "Large volume. How the hell did we miss this?" Sarah said nothing. She already knew the answer. They'd missed it because they'd run their tests hours ago when the condition was just beginning, and then they'd stopped looking. "We need to drain this immediately." Marcus turned, barking orders that transformed the VIP lounge into an improvised treatment space. "Get me a pericardiocentesis kit. Notify—"
"Surgery. We might need an O. Someone call cardiology and tell them to get down here." The emergency department erupted into controlled chaos. Nurses materialized with equipment. Junior physicians responded to pages. The machinery of hospital emergency response ground into motion. Sarah stepped back to let them work, but Marcus caught her wrist. "You stay," he said. "You spotted this. You assist." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even acknowledgement. Just a practical assignment of responsibility now that the crisis was real and undeniable. Sarah nodded once and moved into position. For the next 12 minutes, she existed in a space she'd hoped never to visit again. The heightened focus of life or death medicine, where every second carried weight and every decision branched into futures of survival or loss. Her hands moved automatically, anticipating needs before Marcus voiced them. Supplies appeared in his grip exactly when required. Her movements were economy itself. Nothing wasted, nothing hesitant. Marcus inserted the needle with steady precision, and when fluid began draining from the pericardial sac, Castellan's breathing immediately eased. Color returned to his face. His wife sobbed with relief. "Got it," Marcus said. "We got it in time." He stepped back, letting the cardiology team take over, and only then seemed to register what had just happened. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd started working at Crestview.
"How did you know?" he asked quietly. "I've seen it before." "Where?" Before Sarah could answer, the building shook. It wasn't a small tremor, or the rattle of passing traffic. This was massive, a concussive wave that traveled through the foundation like a physical blow. The lights flickered, ceiling tiles shifted. Somewhere deep in the building's infrastructure, something catastrophic had just occurred. Then the emergency alert system screamed to life. "Code black. Code black. All personnel respond. Explosion in the administrative wing. Multiple casualties. Code black." The phrase repeated, mechanical and urgent, as staff throughout Crestview Memorial tried to process what they'd just heard. Marcus grabbed his phone, already moving toward the door. "Patricia, get me a casualty count. Someone contact the fire department. We need..." The second explosion was closer. This one they felt in their bones. The floor buckled. Windows shattered inward in a spray of crystalline fragments.
Overhead lights died completely, replaced a heartbeat later by the dim red glow of emergency systems. And then the screaming started, not distant, not abstract. Right there in the emergency department where Sarah stood, where patients in bed suddenly found themselves choking on smoke and terror. Marcus stumbled, his earlier authority fragmenting in the face of chaos he couldn't diagnose or treat. Around him, nurses ducked instinctively as debris rained from damaged ceiling panels. Someone was crying. Someone else was calling for help in a voice pitched high with panic. Sarah moved before conscious thought caught up to action. She grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him upright, her grip harder than should have been possible for someone her size. When he looked at her, he saw that same strange certainty, but now it had teeth. "We need to stabilize this department before we help anyone else," she said. Her voice cut through the chaos with surgical precision. "Secure the patients, account for staff, establish a triage point, then we move." "Who the hell do you want to stand here arguing, or do you want to save lives?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded. "Good, get me a head count." And just like that, the hierarchy inverted. Sarah moved through the emergency department like a general surveying a battlefield. She called out orders in a voice that didn't yell, but somehow carried over the noise. Checking structural integrity, identifying patients who could be moved versus those who had to be treated in place, organizing the scattered staff into functional units. Patricia Wade stared at her as though witnessing a magic trick she couldn't explain. "Where's the main structural damage?" Sarah demanded. I don't know. Find out now." Patricia ran. A young resident stumbled out of the supply room, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "What do we..." "Pressure on that wound. Then help me move Mrs. Mitchell. Her room's compromised." They lifted Dorothy Mitchell's bed together, wheeling her toward the interior hallway where falling debris was less likely. The elderly woman was awake now, terrified, clutching Sarah's hand. "You're safe," Sarah told her. "Stay with me." Another tremor shook the building. Not an explosion this time, just the groaning protest of a structure trying to hold together after cataclysmic damage. Dust filtered down from the ceiling like dry snow. Marcus
reappeared, his phone pressed to his ear. "Fire department's 10 minutes out. We have casualties in the administrative wing, at least 20. The executive offices took a direct hit. Gas explosion." "How did you..." "The pattern. The interval between blasts. Construction on the east side has been excavating near the gas mains for 3 weeks. Sarah was already moving toward the stairwell. Anyone left up there? We don't know. Communications are down." Sarah reached the stairwell door and tested the handle. Warm, but not hot. She pulled it open and stared up into smoke-filled darkness. Behind her, Marcus's voice turned sharp. "Winters, don't." She looked back at him. The emergency lighting painted her face in harsh red shadows, and for a moment, she was someone else entirely. Someone who'd made harder decisions than this. "Stay here and coordinate," she said. "Get the stable patients evacuated. Set up triage in the parking lot. When the fire department arrives, tell them the 4th floor needs immediate attention. You can't go up there. You don't have gear. You don't have training." "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "I do." And then she was gone, vanishing into the smoke-choked stairwell before anyone could stop her. Marcus stood frozen, his mind struggling to reconcile the timid probationary nurse he'd dismissed hours earlier with the woman who'd just walked into a burning building without hesitation. Patricia appeared at his elbow, her face white with shock. "What do we do?" she whispered. Marcus didn't have an answer. In the stairwell, Sarah climbed through darkness, broken only by failing emergency lights.
The smoke was thick now, acrid with burning plastic and something else, the chemical tang of natural gas. Her eyes watered, but she didn't slow. She pulled her scrub top over her nose and mouth and kept moving. 4th floor, administrative wing. She emerged into a scene from a nightmare. The explosion had transformed the sleek executive offices into a war zone. Desks overturned, walls collapsed. The ceiling had partially caved in, burying workstations under tons of debris. Small fires burned in scattered locations, feeding on paper and furniture and anything else combustible. And in the center of it all, trapped beneath a fallen steel beam, was Marcus Holloway's supervisor, Dr. Richard Vance, Director of Emergency Services, the man who'd approved Sarah's probationary hiring 6 months ago, and then never looked at her.
File again. He was conscious, barely, and pinned from the waist down by structural steel that would require equipment Sarah didn't have to move. "Help," he gasped when he saw her. "Please, I can't feel my legs." Sarah dropped beside him, her hands already assessing the situation with practiced efficiency. The beam had him trapped, but hadn't crushed him completely. Not yet. But the fires were spreading, and the air was running out. "I'm here," she said. "Tell me where else you're injured." "My shoulder. Something sharp." He turned his head, revealing a 6-inch piece of metal rebar protruding from his right shoulder. Not deep enough to be immediately fatal, but bleeding steadily. Sarah looked around the destroyed office. No supplies, no help. Just her training and whatever she could improvise. She yanked off her scrub top, leaving only a tank top beneath, and began tearing the fabric into strips. Her movements were automatic muscle memory from a time and place most people couldn't imagine. "Listen to me carefully," she said as she worked. "This is going to hurt a lot, but if I don't stabilize that shoulder, you'll bleed out before help arrives. Understand?" Vance nodded, his face gray with pain and fear. Sarah packed the wound with torn fabric, then wrapped it tight enough to slow the bleeding. Vance screamed. She didn't stop. When the wound was secured, she moved to assess the beam trapping his lower body. Too heavy to lift, not enough leverage, and even if she could shift it, the movement might cause more damage. Think. She scanned the ruined office, cataloging resources. A fire extinguisher lay near the wall. Useful, but not for this. Computer cables, office chairs, a filing cabinet tilted at an angle. The filing cabinet. Sarah grabbed it, dragging it closer, despite the way smoke burned her lungs. She positioned it beside the beam, then used the office chairs as makeshift bukrams, building a crude lever system that would have made physics teachers weep, but might actually work. "When I lift," she told Vance, "you pull yourself backward. Don't think, don't hesitate, just move." "I can't." "Yes, you can. On 3. She gripped the improvised lever. Her arms shook, not with fear, but with the simple reality of trying to move several 100 pounds of steel with inadequate mechanical advantage. 1. Vance braced himself. 2. Sarah's muscles tensed. 3. She threw her entire weight against the lever, and for a horrible moment, nothing happened. Then the beam shifted. Just an inch, but enough. Vance dragged himself backward with a howl of agony, and Sarah immediately released the lever, letting the beam crash back down. Vance lay gasping, free but barely conscious. "Can you walk?" Sarah asked. "No." "Then I'm carrying you." She got him into a fireman's carry, despite his size, despite her frame, despite the smoke that now made every breath feel like swallowing glass. And she started back toward the stairwell, moving with the kind of stubborn determination that couldn't be taught or faked. Behind them, one of the small fires found something combustible and roared to life. Sarah didn't look back. She just kept moving, step after step, through smoke and heat and the groaning protests of a building that wanted to collapse. They were halfway down the stairs when she heard voices below, the fire department finally arriving. "Here," she called out, "injured on the stairs." Firefighters materialized through the smoke, taking Vance's weight, surrounding them with competence and equipment and the blessed promise of fresh air. They emerged into the parking lot where Crestview Memorial had transformed into an emergency triage center. Ambulances lined the street. Staff worked under portable lights, and Marcus Holloway stood coordinating the chaos with the shell-shocked efficiency of someone running on pure adrenaline. He saw Sarah emerge from the building and froze. She was covered in soot and blood and ceiling dust. Her hair had escaped its ponytail and hung in smoke-darkened tangles around her face. She looked like she'd been through a war, and maybe she had. The paramedics took Vance from her, rushing him toward waiting transport, and Sarah stood alone in the parking lot,
trying to remember how to be small and forgettable again. But Marcus was walking toward her, his expression unreadable. "You just pulled my supervisor out of a collapsing building," he said. "Someone had to. Where did you learn to do that?" Sarah met his eyes. Later, she'd wished she'd deflected, made something up, protected the truth for a few hours longer. Instead, she told him the truth. "Fallujah," she said quietly. "Kandahar, a dozen other places you've probably never heard of. I was a combat medic for 6 years before I became a civilian nurse." Marcus stared at her. Around them, the organized chaos of the emergency continued, but in that moment, it might as well have been just the two of them standing in the wreckage. "You're military," he said. "Was. And you didn't think to mention that when you applied. Would you have treated me differently if I had?" She said it without accusation, just curiosity. But Marcus flinched anyway, because they both knew the answer. Before he could respond, Patricia Wade appeared.
Earlier hostility replaced by something harder to read. "Sarah," she said, and it was the first time she'd used Sarah's first name all night. "Mrs. Mitchell's asking for you. She won't let them transport her until you tell her she's okay." Sarah nodded and walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the parking lot with questions multiplying in his mind, like fractures spreading through glass. The rest of that night blurred into an endless sequence of triage decisions and patient transfers. Sarah moved between casualties with the same quiet efficiency she demonstrated all along. But now people noticed, watched, whispered. The timid probationary nurse had vanished, replaced by someone who moved through chaos like it was a second language. At dawn, when the last patient had been transferred and the building declared structurally unsafe, Sarah found herself sitting on the curb outside Crestview Memorial's ruined entrance. Her body ached, her lungs burned from smoke inhalation, and somewhere in the past 7 hours, she'd lost the yellow probationary badge that had marked her as less than. Marcus sat down beside her without asking permission. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Marcus said, "I was wrong about you. Yes, I should have listened when you warned me about Castellan. Yes, and I sure as hell shouldn't have dismissed you as inexperienced." Sarah turned to look at him. In the pale morning light, he looked older than his 42 years, exhausted and humbled, and trying to find words for something he'd never had to say before. "You saved lives tonight," he continued. "Castellan, Vance, probably others we haven't counted yet. And you did it after I treated you like you were invisible." "I am used to being invisible," Sarah said quietly. "In the military, I learned that being underestimated is sometimes an advantage. People don't watch you as carefully, don't question your movements, and when the moment comes where you're needed, you're already in position. Is that why you didn't tell anyone about your background? Partly. But also," she paused, choosing words carefully, "I didn't want to be the veteran nurse. I wanted to be just a nurse. Start over. Leave the war behind. Looks like the war found you anyway." Sarah smiled without humor. "It usually does." A news van pulled up to the police barricade, and both of them watched as reporters began setting up cameras. By noon, Crestview Memorial's disaster would be the lead story on every local
channel, and eventually someone would start asking questions about how a probationary nurse had known to check a patient everyone else cleared, had coordinated an emergency response, and had walked into a burning building to pull out a trapped physician. "They're going to want interviews," Marcus said. "I don't do interviews. You might not have a choice. You're a hero. I'm a nurse who did her job." Sarah stood, brushing concrete dust from her scrubs. "The job I would have been doing all along if anyone had let me." She walked away before Marcus could respond, heading toward the temporary staff area where volunteers were distributing water and granola bars to exhausted personnel. But she could feel his eyes on her back, and she knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. By mid-morning, 3 things happened in rapid succession. First, Robert Castellan's wife called the hospital's communication office to thank Sarah personally and ask why her husband's initial symptoms had been dismissed. The call was logged, time-stamped, and impossible to ignore. Second, a veteran firefighter who'd helped extract ants from the 4th floor recognized Sarah's emergency techniques as military-grade training and mentioned it to his captain, who mentioned it to the fire marshal, who made a note in the incident report. Third, Patricia Wade, who'd spent 16 years protecting her territory and her physician allies, pulled Sarah aside in the temporary break area and said something Sarah never expected to hear. "I was wrong about you," Patricia said stiffly. "And I'm sorry." Sarah blinked. "Okay. I mean it. I watched you tonight. You didn't panic.
didn't freeze. You just knew what to do. And I've been a nurse for 16 years, and I didn't know half of what you did. Patricia's face was tight with the effort of admission. So, I'm sorry for dismissing you, for protecting the physicians when I should have been protecting the patients. Apology accepted. Patricia nodded once, then walked away, and Sarah was left wondering if crisis had just rewritten the social order of an entire hospital in the space of 8 hours. Around noon, the hospital's executive team, what remained of it after the explosion took out the administrative wing, called an emergency meeting in a borrowed conference room at the medical building next door. Sarah was summoned. She arrived to find a room full of administrators, senior physicians, legal
counsel, and one very uncomfortable-looking Marcus Holloway. Amant Hospital CEO Angela Reeves sat at the head of the table, her expression professionally neutral in the way that meant she was calculating liability with every word. "Miss Winters," Reeves said, "please sit." Sarah remained standing. "I'd prefer not to. This isn't a disciplinary meeting." "Then what is it? An inquiry?" Reeves folded her hands on the table. "We're trying to understand the sequence of events that led to last night's casualties. Specifically, we're interested in your interactions with Dr. Holloway regarding patient Robert Castellan." "Ah, so this was about blame distribution." Sarah glanced at Marcus, who looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "I observed Mr. Castellan displaying symptoms of acute cardiac distress," Sarah said carefully. "I reported those observations to Dr. Holloway. He examined the patient and diagnosed pericardial effusion, which he treated successfully. But initially, Dr. Holloway dismissed your concerns. He exercised his medical judgment based on earlier test results. That's not what we heard from Mrs. Castellan. Then I suggest you ask Mrs. Castellan what she heard, not me." Reeves's expression tightened. "Miss Winters, we're trying to determine if proper protocols were followed." "Protocols were followed," Sarah interrupted. "I reported my observations to the attending physician. He made a decision. When the patient's condition deteriorated, he revised that decision and provided appropriate care. That's how emergency medicine works. Even when the initial decision was incorrect. Every medical decision is made with incomplete information. Dr. Holloway saved Mr. Castellan's life. That's what matters." Across the table, Marcus looked at her with something approaching wonder. The legal counsel cleared his throat. "Miss Winters, we also understand you entered the administrative wing after the explosion despite lacking firefighting certification or structural safety training." "I did." "And you removed Dr. Vance from the building without waiting for emergency services?" "Yes." "Can you explain your reasoning?" Sarah met his eyes. "Dr. Vance was dying. I had training relevant to the situation. I made a judgment call." "Training from where?" And there it was, the question that had been circling since dawn like a patient predator. Sarah took a breath. "I served 6 years as a combat medic with the U.S. Army, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I'm trained in tactical
medicine, mass casualty response, and combat extraction. Last night's situation fell well within my operational experience." Silence. Reeves recovered first. "Why wasn't this information in your employment file?" "Because I listed my civilian nursing credentials, which are what you hired me for. But surely your military experience is relevant to what? Taking vital signs, administering medications? Those skills are the same regardless of where you learn them." The human resources director spoke up, her voice thin. "Miss Winters, our hiring protocols require disclosure of all relevant professional experience. I disclosed my nursing license and civilian hospital rotations. Nothing in your application asked about military service." "It's implied." "No," Sarah said quietly. "It's not. And if you're suggesting I committed fraud by not volunteering information you didn't request, I'd recommend you consult your legal team before making that accusation official." More silence. The legal counsel was scribbling notes now, his expression thoughtful. Reeves tried a different approach. "Miss Winters, we're not trying to attack you. We're trying to understand what happened. And frankly, your actions last night, while undoubtedly heroic, have raised questions about our screening processes and supervision protocols. Are you asking me to resign? No. But we are going to conduct a thorough review of—" The conference room door opened, cutting Reeves off mid-sentence. A man in an expensive suit entered without knocking, flanked by a woman carrying a briefcase that probably costs more than Sarah's monthly rent. Robert Castellan walking alive, visibly angry. "Mr. Castellan," Reeves stood. "You should be resting. I should be dead," Castellan said flatly. "According to the cardiologist who examined me this morning, I was maybe 15 minutes away from cardiac arrest when Nurse Winters convinced Dr. Holloway to—" Planning. Maybe ask yourself what happens when I share that footage with my attorney. The legal counsel stopped writing. "I'm not here to threaten you," Castellan said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm here to thank Ms. Winters personally, and to inform you that I'm making a substantial donation to this hospital contingent on certain personnel changes." "What kind of changes?" Reeves asked carefully. "The kind where nurses who save lives get recognized instead of questioned?" Castellan smiled without warmth. "I'll leave the specific details to your HR department, but I suggest you start by ending Ms. Winter's probationary status and apologizing for whatever this meeting was supposed to be." He turned and walked out, his attorney following, leaving a room full of administrators in stunned silence. Reeves sat down slowly. "Ms. Winters, I think we're done here." "Am I being dismissed?" "You're being thanked, officially." Reeves smiled, looked painful. "Your probationary period is over as of today, and we'll be reviewing your case for advancement opportunities." "I don't want advancement," Sarah said. "I want to do my job without being treated like I'm incompetent." "Noted." Sarah left the conference room and found Marcus waiting in the hallway outside. "You didn't have to protect me in there," he said. "I wasn't protecting you. I was being accurate. You could have buried me, told them exactly how I dismissed you, how I refused to examine Castellan until you forced the issue. And what would that accomplish?" Marcus shook his head. "I don't understand you." "You don't have to," Sarah said. "You just have to work with me." She walked away. And this time Marcus didn't follow, just stood in the hallway trying to reconcile everything he thought he knew about competence, hierarchy, and the quiet nurse who'd just rewritten every assumption he'd built his career on. The temporary break room smelled like burnt coffee and antiseptic wipes. Sarah found an empty chair in the corner and sat down for the first time in 14 hours. Her legs trembled, not from fear, but from the simple biological fact that adrenaline eventually runs out and leaves you hollow. Someone had brought donuts. They sat in a box on the folding table, untouched, because nobody had the stomach for sugar after the night they'd survived. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to find the quiet place she learned to access in dusty field hospitals half a world away. That space where exhaustion lived but couldn't touch you, where you could function on muscle memory and training while your conscious mind took a mandatory break. She almost got there. "You're Sarah Winters." The voice belonged to a man in fire department gear, soot still streaking his face. Mid-40s, tired eyes that had seen too much. He stood in the doorway holding 2 bottles of water, and something in his posture made Sarah sit up straighter. "That's me. I'm Captain Luis Ramirez. My crew pulled Dr. Vance from the administrative wing." He crossed the room and held out one of the water bottles. "The way you packed that shoulder wound, the improvised lever system, that's not civilian training." Sarah took the water but didn't open it. "No." "Where'd you serve?" "Iraq. Afghanistan. Couple other places." Ramirez nodded slowly, recognition passing between them in the wordless language veterans share. "Fallujah, second tour. Nasty." He pulled out a chair and sat down without asking permission. "My cousin was Army medical, served in Romani. Came back different. They all do." Sarah finally opened the water and drank half the bottle in one long pull. Her throat still burned from smoke inhalation. "Your cousin still practicing?" "No. He drives a delivery truck now. Says he needed something simple, something that didn't involve decisions that cost lives." "I understand that. But you came back and chose emergency medicine anyway." Sarah looked at him. "Where else was I supposed to go? It's what I know how to do." Ramirez studied her for a moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "Fire marshal's going to want a statement, probably today. The explosion pattern suggests deliberate sabotage, not a construction accident, which means this becomes a criminal investigation." Sabotage. Gas line was severed manually, clean cut. Someone knew what they were doing. He set the card on the table between them. "When they ask you what you saw, be specific. Timestamps matter. Details matter. And don't let the hospital's legal team coach you before you give your statement." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I know how these things play out. Hospitals going to try to control the narrative, make sure their liability exposure is minimal, and the easiest way to do that is to find someone to blame who isn't on their "Permanent payroll." He stood. "You saved lives last night. Don't let them turn that into a liability." He left before Sarah could respond, and she sat alone in the break room, holding his card and trying to figure out if she'd just been warned or recruited. By early afternoon, Crestview Memorial had transformed into something between a crime scene and a media circus. Police tape cordoned off the damaged sections.
Investigators in hazmat suits moved through the wreckage, documenting evidence, and news crews had multiplied like bacteria, their cameras capturing every angle of the devastation. Sarah tried to slip out the side exit and nearly collided with a reporter. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Winters?" No comment. "Just one question. Is it true you're a decorated combat veteran who saved multiple lives during the explosion?" Sarah kept walking. The reporter followed. "Our sources say you diagnosed a critical patient after senior physicians missed it. Can you confirm?" "Talk to the hospital's communications office." "We did. They said you're unavailable for interviews, which makes people wonder what they're hiding." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face the reporter fully. Young, ambitious, the kind of journalist who thought aggressive questioning equaled good reporting. "I'm not hiding anything," Sarah said quietly. "I'm a nurse who did my job during an emergency. That's the entire story. But your military background is irrelevant to what happened here. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on my patients." She walked away fast enough that following would have looked like harassment on camera. The reporter didn't pursue, but Sarah felt the lens tracking her until she disappeared around the corner. Inside the temporary triage area, organized chaos continued. Patients who'd been stable enough to avoid immediate transport still needed monitoring. Staff rotated through shifts, grabbing sleep in stolen increments. And everywhere, people watched Sarah differently now, not quite staring, but aware, measuring her against some new standard that hadn't existed yesterday. Dorothy Mitchell occupied a bed near the window, oxygen cannula in place, her earlier terror replaced by a fierce determination to tell anyone who'd listen about the nurse who'd saved her life. "There you are," Dorothy said when Sarah approached. "They tried to transfer me to County General. I told them absolutely not until I could thank you properly. Mrs. Mitchell, you need cardiac monitoring."
County has better equipment. County doesn't have you. Dorothy reached out and grabbed Sarah's hand with surprising strength. "That Dr. Holloway, he wouldn't listen when you told him something was wrong with me, but you kept checking, kept documenting, and when everything went to hell, you moved me to safety before taking care of anyone else." Sarah started to deflect, but Dorothy cut her off. "Don't you dare diminish what you did. I'm 73 years old. I've been invisible to doctors for the past decade, just another elderly woman with vague complaints. But you saw me. You treated me like I mattered." Dorothy's eyes were wet. "So thank you for seeing me when nobody else did." Sarah squeezed her hand gently. "Get some rest, Mrs. Mitchell, and let them transfer you. You'll be safer there. Will you visit? If I can. Promise me." Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. "Promise." She moved through the rest of her patients with the same quiet efficiency, but Dorothy's words stuck with her. You saw me when nobody else did. Maybe that was the real skill she'd learned in the military, not the trauma medicine or the emergency protocols, but the ability to see people instead of problems, to recognize when someone was screaming silently for help while everyone around them looked away. At 3 p.m., Sarah was summoned to the hospital administrator's temporary office, a borrowed conference room that still smelled like whoever had eaten lunch there. Angela Reeves sat behind a folding table that was trying hard to be a desk. She looked like she'd aged 5 years since morning, her professional composure showing cracks around the edges. "Ms. Winters, sit. I'd rather stand. This isn't optional." Sarah sat. Reeves shuffled papers that probably didn't need shuffling. "The fire marshal wants to interview you this afternoon. They're calling it a preliminary statement, but we both know it's more than that. Captain Ramirez mentioned. Did he also mention you should have legal representation? Am I being accused of something? No, but the explosion is now a criminal investigation, sabotage, which means everyone present becomes a potential witness or suspect." Sarah went very still. "Suspect. The gas line was deliberately cut. Security footage shows you had access to the administrative wing on multiple occasions over the past 6 months, including yesterday afternoon."
Reeves held up a hand before Sarah could speak. "I'm not saying you're under suspicion. I'm saying the investigators will look at everyone who had opportunity, and your military background gives you knowledge most civilians don't have. You think I blew up the hospital where I work? I think you need a lawyer before you talk to the fire marshal. And I think the hospital needs to protect itself from any implication that we employed someone capable of. I saved lives last night." Sarah's voice stayed level, but something dangerous moved beneath the surface. "I pulled your director of emergency services out of a burning building.
I coordinated triage while your senior staff panicked. And now you're suggesting I might have caused the disaster I helped contain? I'm suggesting you protect yourself legally. That's all. No, Sarah stood. You're covering the hospital's liability by creating distance between my actions and the institution's responsibility. You're making sure that if the investigation goes sideways, I'm the one holding the bag. Reeves's professional mask finally slipped. You don't understand the position we're in. Robert Castellan's attorney is already asking questions about negligence. The families of patients injured in the explosion are talking lawsuits, and now we have federal investigators looking at deliberate destruction of a medical facility. The hospital needs to demonstrate we took appropriate precautions. By throwing me under the bus? By following protocol? Sarah leaned forward, her palms flat on the folding table. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give the fire marshal my statement. I'm going to tell them exactly what I saw, when I saw it, and what I did about it. And I'm going to do it without your lawyers coaching me on how to minimize institutional liability, because unlike this hospital, I don't have anything to hide. She walked out before Reeves could respond. In the hallway outside, Marcus Holloway stood with his back against the wall, his expression unreadable. How much did you hear? Sarah asked. Enough. He pushed off the wall and fell into step beside her. They're scared. I know. Not just of lawsuits, of you. Sarah stopped walking. Explain. Marcus chose his words carefully. You made us all look incompetent last night. Not intentionally, but the contrast is stark. Senior physicians frozen while a probationary nurse takes charge.
Decorated doctors missing diagnoses that you caught. The hospital's entire hierarchy inverted by someone who'd been here 6 months. He met her eyes. That's terrifying to people whose authority depends on perceived competence. I didn't ask for any of this. I know, but it happened anyway. And now everyone's trying to figure out where you fit in a system that wasn't designed to accommodate someone like you, someone like me, someone who's actually good at their job. It was the first time Marcus had said anything approaching a genuine compliment, and it landed with unexpected weight. The fire marshal's office is in the East Wing, Marcus continued. I'll walk with you. Moral support or witness protection, whichever you need. Why? Because I owe you. And because if they're looking for someone to blame, I'd rather they look at me than you. They walked through the hospital's temporary corridors in silence, passing staff who watched them with open curiosity. The odd couple, the decorated emergency physician, and the combat veteran nurse who'd outperformed him when it mattered most. The fire marshal's temporary office occupied a room that had been a patient consultation space before the explosion. Now it held folding tables covered with evidence bags, photographs of the destruction, and architectural plans marked with investigators' notes. Fire Marshal Rebecca Torres was 50-some and carried herself with the particular weariness of someone who'd spent decades documenting how humans hurt each other. She looked up when Sarah and Marcus entered, her eyes sharp and assessing. Ms. Winters, thank you for coming. I was told it wasn't optional. Torres smiled with humor. It's not, but I appreciate the cooperation anyway. Dr. Holloway, I don't recall asking for you. I'm here as a colleague, Marcus said. This is a witness interview, not a team-building exercise. Then I'll wait outside. Torres gestured to a chair across from her. Sit. This will take a while. Sarah sat. Marcus left, though she could feel his presence on the other side of the door, like a promise that someone was watching. Torres activated a recording device and stated the date, time, and participants. Then she leaned back and studied Sarah for a long moment. Let's start with the obvious question, Torres said. Do you have any knowledge of or involvement in the explosions that occurred at Crestview Memorial Hospital at approximately 3:18 a.m. on May 26, 2026? No. You are certain? I'm certain. Torres made a note. According to security logs, you accessed the administrative wing on 14 separate occasions over the past 6 months. What was the nature of those visits?
Delivering lab results, consulting with Dr. Hervance on patient cases, once to retrieve a lost phone charger. Sarah kept her voice level. Standard nursing duties, nothing that required explosives training. You have explosives training? I have combat medical training, which includes treating blast injuries, not causing them. But you'd know how to disable a gas line. I'd know how to recognize a gas leak and evacuate people. That's different. Torres pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. It showed the severed gas line, the cut clean and precise. This wasn't an accident.
Whoever did this knew exactly where to cut and how to create maximum pressure buildup before ignition. Sarah studied the image. Looks like a hacksaw or angle grinder. Maybe both. The edges are too clean for an explosion or construction damage. How do you know that? Because I spent 6 years looking at things that had been blown up. You learn to read the evidence. Torres leaned forward. Walk me through your movements yesterday. Start from when you arrived for your shift. Sarah did. She detailed every patient interaction, every consultation with physicians, every moment she'd spent in the various wings of the hospital. Her memory for specifics was perfect. Times, locations, witnesses. The kind of recall that came from years of documenting combat medicine, where mistakes got people killed, and poor record-keeping got you court-martialed. When she reached the part about warning Marcus regarding Robert Castellan, Torres stopped her. So, Dr. Holloway initially dismissed your concerns. He exercised his medical judgment based on available information. That's diplomatic. Mrs. Castellan described it differently, said he was condescending and refused to examine her husband until you insisted. Mrs. Castellan was understandably stressed. Stop protecting him, Torres said flatly. I need accurate information, not institutional loyalty. Sarah met her eyes. Fine. Dr. Holloway dismissed me because I'm a probationary nurse with limited civilian experience. He assumed I was manufacturing a crisis to look important. He was wrong, but his mistake doesn't make him a criminal, just human. And when you realized the patient was deteriorating, I documented my observations and reported them again. That's protocol. Even when protocol requires you to watch someone die. The question hung in the air like smoke.
Sarah took a slow breath. I've watched people die, Marshal Torres. I've held pressure on wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding and performed CPR on soldiers who were already gone. I've made triage decisions that meant some people got care while others didn't. So don't ask me theoretical questions about protocol versus conscience. I live in that space. Every shift, every decision. Torres's expression softened fractionally. You went into a burning building to rescue Dr. Vance. Yes, without gear, without backup, without authorization, without time. He was dying. I had training relevant to the situation, so I acted. Did you see anyone else in the administrative wing before the explosion? Sarah closed her eyes, pulling up the memory. The hallway before disaster. She delivered lab results to Dr. Vance's office around 2 p.m. The corridor had been mostly empty. Late afternoon lull. But there was a maintenance worker, she said slowly, near the mechanical room. I didn't recognize him, but we have contractors in and out constantly. Torres sat up straighter. Description: white male, 40s, maybe 5'10", dark coveralls, work boots, carrying a toolbox. Sarah's eyes opened. He had a badge. I saw it clipped to his belt, but I didn't read the name. Did you see his face? Not clearly. He had his back to me, working on something near the gas line access panel. Why didn't you mention this earlier? Because I didn't think about it. He looked like every other contractor we have working on the East Wing renovation. Nothing stood out as suspicious until you asked. Torres was already texting someone, her fingers flying across her phone. Can you work with a sketch artist? Yes. Good. Because we just pulled security footage from that corridor. It shows a maintenance worker accessing the gas line at 2:11 p.m., but according to the contractor logs, nobody was scheduled for gas line work yesterday. Torres looked up. You might have just given us our suspect. The weight of that settled over Sarah like a blanket. She'd walked past the saboteur, made eye contact, continued on her rounds without a second thought, because he looked like he belonged there. If I'd stopped him, she started. You didn't know, Torres said firmly. Don't do that to yourself. He wore the right uniform, had the right equipment. Even security didn't flag him. So unless you're psychic, you had
No reason to intervene. But Sarah did the calculation anyway. If she'd questioned him, if she'd asked to see his work order, if she'd reported the unexpected maintenance to facilities management, the explosion might never have happened. 3 hours later, Sarah sat with a sketch artist reconstructing a face she'd barely seen. The process was frustrating. Her memory kept trying to fill gaps with assumptions, to sharpen details that had been blurry in real time. But slowly, an image emerged. Mid-40s, strong jaw, dead eyes. That's him, she said. Finally, the sketch artist saved the image and sent it to Torres, who studied it with the intensity of someone cataloging a serial killer. We'll run this through databases, Torres said. See if he matches anyone with explosives, training, or grievances against medical facilities. You think this was personal? Always is.
Nobody bombs the hospital for kicks. This was deliberate, targeted, and designed to cause maximum casualties during a specific shift. Sarah felt cold. The overnight shift, when staffing is minimal and response time is longest. Exactly. Whoever did this knew the hospital's routines, knew when to strike for maximum impact with minimum interference. Torres closed her laptop, which means he either worked here at some point or he spent a lot of time studying the place. How many people died? Torres hesitated. Official count is still being compiled, but preliminary reports suggest at least 6. 4 staff members in the administrative wing, 2 patients who couldn't be evacuated in time. 6 people. 6 lives that Sarah might have saved if she'd been more suspicious, more paranoid, more willing to question someone who looked like they belonged. That's not on you, Torres said, reading her expression. That's on the person who planted the bomb. Don't confuse the two. But Sarah already was, because that's what soldiers did. They counted their failures more carefully than their successes, and carried the weight of both. By evening, news of the investigation had spread through the hospital like infection. Staff whispered in corners. Security had been tripled, and everyone who'd been on shift during the explosion found themselves being interviewed, their movements documented, their alibis verified. Sarah returned to the temporary break room and found Patricia Wade waiting. They questioned me for 2 hours, Patricia said without preamble. Asked where I was, who I saw, whether I noticed anything suspicious.
She looked exhausted. I told them about you warning Dr. Holloway, about how you took charge during the crisis, about the maintenance worker nobody can identify. I'm sorry. Don't be. It needed to be said. Patricia sat down heavily. I've been thinking about what you said during the meeting with administration, about just wanting to do your job without being treated as incompetent. Patricia, let me finish. I've spent 16 years in this hospital. I've seen good nurses burned out by bad physicians. I've watched competent staff leave because the culture here rewards seniority over skill. And I participated in that system because it benefited me, because I was senior enough to be protected. She met Sarah's eyes. But watching you last night, seeing what real competence looks like, I realized I've been part of the problem. So, I'm sorry, genuinely, and if you'll let me, I'd like to help fix it. Sarah studied her, looking for manipulation or self-interest, and finding only tired sincerity. How? She asked. By standing with you when administration tries to scapegoat you, by vouching for your skills when people question your judgment, by being the kind of nurse I should have been all along, one who puts patients before politics. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Maybe enough to start rebuilding a culture that had nearly killed Robert Castellan through arrogance and Dorothy Mitchell through neglect. Okay, Sarah said. Let's fix it. Night fell over Crestview Memorial's ruins, and Sarah finally allowed herself to leave the building. She walked to her car, a 10-year-old sedan that had carried her across 3 states and countless fresh starts, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. This is Captain Ramirez. Sketch just got a hit. Suspect identified as former hospital employee terminated 3 years ago. Active warrant issued. Thought you should know your eyes helped catch him. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Then another text arrived. Also, you did good last night. Real good. Don't let them take that from you. She set the phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes, feeling the weight of 14 hours crash into her all at once. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Another emergency. Another crisis. The machinery of trauma continued grinding forward, whether
anyone was ready or not. Sarah started the car and drove toward home, exhaustion pulling at her bones. She made it 3 blocks before her phone rang. Hospital number. Winters. This is Dr. Vance. The voice was weak, but recognizable. I'm in recovery at County General. They said you pulled me out of the Rebel. Yes. I don't remember most of it, but I remember you telling me to pull myself backward when you lifted the beam. I remember thinking you sounded like a drill sergeant. Close enough. Silence. Then, thank you for not leaving me there to die. You're welcome. I owe you my life. When I'm back on my feet, when this is over, I want to make this right. The way you've been treated here, the way we all dismissed you, it's unacceptable. Focus on healing, Dr. Vance. We'll worry about the rest later. She ended the call and continued driving, but something had shifted. The ground beneath her was still unstable, still threatening to collapse into recrimination and institutional blame. But people were starting to see her, really see her. Not the probationary nurse or the invisible veteran, but the person who'd kept her head when everyone else lost theirs.
Sarah pulled into her apartment complex just as her phone buzzed again. This time, the message made her blood freeze. Unknown. You shouldn't have survived the explosion. That's twice you've interfered. There won't be a third time. She sat very still, reading the message again, then again. The bomber hadn't been caught. The sketch had identified him, but identification wasn't captured. He was still out there, still angry, and now he knew her name. Sarah's finger hovered over the screen, muscle memory screaming at her to screenshot the threat before it disappeared. She captured it, then immediately forwarded the message to Captain Ramirez with 2 words, "Got this." His response came back in seconds. "Don't go inside your apartment. Stay in the car. Police en route." She looked up at her building, a converted warehouse with exterior stairs and too many blind corners. 3rd floor and unit. Windows she'd left act for air circulation. A door lock that was adequate, but not military grade. Perfect kill box if someone wanted her dead. Sarah started the engine and backed out of her parking space, her eyes scanning rooftops and parked vehicles. Training she'd hoped to leave behind flooded back with uncomfortable ease. Sightlines, escape routes,
Potential ambush positions. Her apartment complex transformed from home to tactical problem in the span of 3 seconds. She drove 2 blocks and parked under a convenience store security lights, keeping the engine running. Through her rearview mirror, she watched the entrance to her street, waiting. 10 minutes later, 3 patrol cars arrived with lights dark, but moving fast. They surrounded her building with practiced efficiency, and Sarah felt a small knot in her chest loosen. Not alone. Not yet. Her phone rang. "This is Detective Ray Foster, Millbrook PD. Captain Ramirez briefed me on the threat. Officers are clearing your apartment now. Where are you?" Sarah gave him the address. "Stay there. We're sending a unit to your location." "I can take care of myself." "I don't doubt that. But if this is our bombing suspect making threats, taking care of yourself isn't going to be enough." Foster's voice carried the weight of someone who delivered too many death notifications. "He killed 6 people last night. He won't hesitate to make it 7. The line went dead, and Sarah sat in the artificial brightness of the parking lot, watching moths batter themselves against the overhead lights. Stupid insects, drawn to something that would eventually kill them just because it looked warm. A patrol car pulled up 15 minutes later. Young officer, fresh face, nervous hands on the wheel. "Miss Winters, I'm Officer Garrett. Detective Foster wants you at the station." "My apartment's still being processed. They found evidence of forced entry on your balcony door. Lock was picked recently. Crime scene techs are going through it now." Sarah's jaw tightened. Someone had been inside her space, touched her things, violated the one place she tried to build something that felt like safety. "Get in," Garrett said. "I'll drive." The Millbrook Police Department occupied a squat brick building that looked like it had been designed during the Cold War by someone who'd never heard of natural light. Sarah followed Officer Garrett through corridors that smelled like burned coffee and old paperwork, until they reached an interview room that was trying hard to look friendly, and failing. Detective Foster waited inside. Mid-50s, gray hair, cropped military short, shoulders that had carried weight, and knew how to distribute it. When he stood to shake her hand, his grip was firm, but not performative. "Thank you for coming in." Didn't have much choice. "There's always a choice." Foster gestured to a chair. "Though I'll admit your options tonight weren't great." Sarah sat. "What did you find in my apartment?" "Besides the picked lock, nothing obvious. No explosives, no booby traps, but our suspect knew you weren't home and entered anyway, which suggests surveillance. He's watching you. How long? Unknown. Could be days, could be hours." Foster pulled out a tablet and brought up security footage. "This is from your building's parking lot camera 2 nights ago. Recognize this vehicle?" The image showed a white panel van, generic and forgettable, the kind contractors drove. The license plate was partially obscured by strategic mud placement. "No. Neither does anyone else in your building, but it appears in the parking lot footage on 3 separate occasions over the past week. Never stays long, always parks where it has clear line of sight to your unit." Foster swiped to another image. "And this is from tonight, 40 minutes before you got home. Same van, same parking position, but this time the driver was visible through the windshield. Just a silhouette, but the posture matched the maintenance worker Sarah had described to the sketch artist." "He's been watching me for a week," Sarah said quietly. "Looks that way. Question is, why? What made you a target?" Sarah thought about the maintenance worker she'd walked past, the eye contact that hadn't registered as significant until it was too late. Had he recognized her even then, marked her as someone who might remember his face? "I saw him," she said before the explosion, "in the administrative corridor. He looked at me, I looked at him, and now I'm the only witness who can place him at the scene. The sketch you provided has been circulated.
We identified him as Thomas Breener, 44, former facilities maintenance supervisor at Crestview Memorial, terminated 3 years ago after multiple complaints about hostile behavior and insubordination. Foster pulled up a personnel photo. Same dead eyes, same strong jaw. He filed a wrongful termination lawsuit that went nowhere, made threats against hospital administration. Mandatory psych evaluation flagged him as high risk, but not enough for involuntary commitment. Where is he now? Unknown. Last known address is abandoned. No credit card activity, no cell phone pings. He's gone dark. Foster leaned forward. But he's still in Millbrook, still watching. And now he's made a direct threat against
You. What do you want me to do? Leave town tonight? We can arrange protective custody until... No, Ms. Winters. I'm not running from someone who kills people and then threatens witnesses. Sarah's voice stayed level, but gained an edge. You want to catch him? Use me as bait. Foster shook his head. That's not how we operate. Then how do you operate? Wait for him to try again. Hope he makes... Abort. Clear. Clear. Ramirez crossed his arms. What's the operational plan? Breer wants her, so we give him an opportunity. Controlled environment, multiple surveillance points, tactical support standing by. Foster pulled up a map on the tablet. Tomorrow morning, Ms. Winters returns to Crestview Memorial for her scheduled shift. We leak her location through channels we know Breer's monitoring. Hospital staff communications, social media, public scheduling boards. Make it look like she's going back to work despite the threats. And when he makes his move, Torres asked. We have units positioned inside and outside the hospital. Plainclothes officers in the corridors, tactical team on standby. The moment he shows himself, we move. Sarah listened to them plan her potential death with professional detachment. It was a decent strategy, obvious bait, but sometimes obvious worked because desperate people took desperate chances. What if he doesn't come? She asked. Then we try something else, but based on his pattern, the surveillance, the threat, the escalation, he's fixated. He'll come. Foster met her eyes. Question is whether you can hold it together when he does. I can. You've been awake for almost 24 hours. You're running on adrenaline and stubbornness. That's not a sustainable operational state. It's the only state I've got. Foster sighed. Fine. We move at 0700 tomorrow. That gives us 8 hours to set up surveillance and position assets. Ms. Winters, you'll stay here tonight. We have a break room with a cot. Not comfortable, but secure. I've slept in worse places. The break room was exactly as advertised. A cot, a flickering fluorescent light, and a coffee maker that looked like it predated modern safety standards. Sarah lay down fully clothed and stared at the water-stained ceiling tiles, her mind refusing to shut down despite her body's protests. Somewhere in Millbrook, Thomas Breer was planning her death, running scenarios, testing approaches, building the patience of someone who'd already demonstrated he could wait for the perfect moment. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to find sleep, found combat memories instead. The helicopter's rotors, the smell of blood and aviation fuel, the weight of a soldier's life bleeding out beneath her hands while someone screamed for morphine they didn't have. She'd left that world behind, or tried to, but maybe it had never really let her go. Morning came.
Too fast and too slow. Sarah showered in the police department's locker room, borrowed a clean set of scrubs that someone had retrieved from her
apartment, and tried to look like a nurse heading to work instead of bait walking into a trap. Detective Foster briefed her one final time in the parking lot while plane officers tested their communications equipment. Radio earpiece, he said, handing her a device disguised as a hearing aid. Constant open channel. We'll hear everything you hear. If Breer approaches, you engage in conversation. Keep him talking. Give us time to move into position. And if he doesn't want to talk, then you hit the floor and let us handle it. You're a witness, not a combatant. Sarah clipped the earpiece in place. Understood. One more thing. Foster's expression was grim. If this goes wrong, if Breer has explosives or takes hostages, the priority becomes containment, which means we might not be able to extract you immediately. I know how triage works, Detective. Save the many, not the few. I really hope it doesn't come to that. Me too. The drive to Crestview Memorial felt surreal. Sarah rode in an unmarked car with Officer Garrett playing the role of her concerned boyfriend dropping her off at work. The hospital loomed ahead, still bearing the scars of the explosion. Shattered windows covered with plywood, police tape marking restricted areas. But the emergency department was functional, and staff continued moving through the building like antibodies fighting infection. Sarah got out of the car and walked toward the entrance, hyper-aware of every vehicle in the parking lot, every shadow that might conceal a threat. The earpiece transmitted Foster's voice in her ear. Multiple units in position. Rooftop surveillance active. You're covered. She pushed through the doors into the emergency department and was immediately surrounded by familiar chaos. Patricia Wade looked up from a patient chart, surprise flickering across her face. Sarah, you're back. Where else would I be?
I don't know, home, sleeping, anywhere but here, after everything that happened. Sarah moved to the nurse's station and logged into the system, pulling up the patient roster. People need care. That doesn't stop just because someone tried to kill us. Patricia studied her. You're different. How? I don't know. Harder, maybe? Like something shifted last night and you stopped pretending to be small. Maybe I did. Sarah worked through morning rounds with mechanical efficiency, but every nerve stayed alert, watching, waiting.
The earpiece fed her a constant stream of updates. Surveillance teams repositioning, officers tracking vehicles entering the parking lot, tactical units running readiness drills. 2 hours passed. Nothing. Sarah was checking Dorothy Mitchell's vitals when the elderly woman grabbed her wrist. You look terrible, dear. I'm fine. You look like someone who hasn't slept and is expecting the worst. Dorothy's grip tightened. What's wrong? The opened her mouth to deflect, though stopped. Dorothy had been dismissed and nearly died because people hadn't listened. She deserved truth. The person who bombed the hospital threatened me last night. Police think he might try again today. Dorothy went pale. Then why are you here? Because I'm the only witness who can identify him. And if we want to catch him, I need to be visible. That's insane. You're using yourself as bait. Yes, Sarah, I know, but it's the right call. And if he does come, I need you to stay in this room. Lock the door. Don't come out until police say it's safe. Dorothy's eyes were wet. You're the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish. Maybe both? Definitely both. Sarah finished her vitals check and moved to the next patient. The morning stretched into afternoon, tension building with each passing hour. Foster's voice in her ear was growing frustrated. He's not taking the bait. Maybe he knows we're here, or maybe he was smarter than they'd assumed, patient enough to wait for the perfect moment instead of rushing in when the target was most protected. At 2 p.m., Sarah took her break in the hospital cafeteria. She sat alone at a corner table, her back to the wall, old habit from deployments where mesh halls doubled as targets. The earpiece stayed silent now, just the faint hiss of an open channel. She was halfway through a sandwich she couldn't taste when someone sat down across from her. Thomas Breer in a visitor's badge, hospital volunteer shirt, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. "Don't scream, don't run, and don't reach for that earpiece unless you want to see how many of these people die before your police friends can get here." His hand rested on the table, relaxed, steady, and beneath it, partially visible through his volunteer shirt, Sarah saw the outline of a dead man's switch wired to something hidden beneath his clothes. He'd walked into a hospital full of cops wearing a bomb.
Sarah's training took over before conscious thought could interfere. Her body language stayed neutral. No sudden movements, no visible panic. Just a woman continuing to eat her sandwich while processing the reality that she was sitting across from a suicide bomber in a cafeteria full of civilians. "Smart," Breer said. "I can see you calculating blast radius casualties, whether you can take me down before I let go of this switch. You can't. I know." Sarah set down her sandwich with deliberate care. "So let's skip the posturing. What do you want?" "I want you to understand what you took from me." Through the earpiece, she heard Foster's voice, sharp and urgent. "Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Tactical is moving to evacuation protocol." But evacuation meant movement, panic, chaos, exactly the kind of trigger that would make Breer's finger slip on that switch. 3 years ago, Breer continued, his voice conversational, "I worked 80-hour weeks keeping this hospital functional, fixed the air handlers when they failed during summer, replaced corroded pipes that would have poisoned the water supply, caught a gas leak and accelerated the inevitable." The cafeteria around them continued its normal rhythm. Staff grabbing coffee, patients shuffling through with IV poles, nobody noticing the bomb sitting at table 12. "Foster," Sarah subvocalized, barely moving her lips. "He's got details about hospital safety violations. This wasn't just revenge. He's trying to expose negligence." Foster's response crackled through the earpiece. "Keep him talking. Bomb squad is reviewing building plans for approach vectors." But Sarah was already calculating different math. Breer had walked past security, past police surveillance, past every layer of protection they'd established, which meant he'd been inside the hospital longer than they'd realized, long enough to observe their setup, to identify their weaknesses. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "Since 6 a.m. Came in with the morning volunteers, helped deliver breakfast trays, smiled at the nurses.
Breer's expression was almost amused. "Your detective, Foster, has officers watching the entrances, but nobody checks the volunteers who were already here when the shifts changed." Sarah's stomach throbbed. He'd been inside the perimeter for 8 hours, had access to the entire building, could have placed additional devices anywhere. "There are more bombs," she said quietly. 3 more small ones, just enough to seal the exits and trap everyone inside when I'm ready. Breer's fingers drummed the table next to the switch. "But I don't want mass casualties this time. I want witnesses. I want the media to see what happens when hospitals value profits over safety, when they silence the people trying to protect patients. You're trying to force a scandal. I'm trying to force accountability. The lawsuit did nothing. The complaints went nowhere. But a hospital full of hostages with bombs in the evacuation routes, that gets attention. That makes people ask questions about why someone would go to such extremes." I heard Foster coordinating in her ear, bomb squad deploying, evacuation being suspended, tactical teams repositioning. But every decision increased the risk. Any movement might trigger Breer's paranoia and his finger on that switch. "Let me help you," Sarah said. Breer laughed without humor. "You're the last person who can help me. I'm the only person who can. You want accountability? I've got 6 months of documented observations about this hospital's problems, safety violations, protocol failures, cases of negligence that almost killed patients."
Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Dorothy Mitchell nearly died because physicians dismissed early warning signs. Robert Castellan almost went into cardiac arrest because nobody followed up on test results. I've been documenting everything, trying to fix the system from inside." "Then why are you defending them?" "I'm not defending anyone. I'm trying to save the people in this building who had nothing to do with your termination. The janitors, the cafeteria workers, the patients who are already victims of the same system you're angry at." Breer stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes. "You really think you can fix it? Change a system that's been broken for decades? Not alone, but with evidence, with testimony from someone on the inside who documented the failures. That's how you create change. Not with bombs, with truth that can't be ignored. They ignored me, because you were one person making accusations. But me? I'm the combat veteran who saved lives during an explosion you caused. I'm the nurse the media has been covering. If I stand up and say this hospital has systemic safety problems, people will listen." Sarah held his gaze. "Let me be your witness. The right way." For a long moment, Breer said nothing. His hand stayed on the switch, steady and deadly. Around them, the cafeteria's ambient noise continued. Silverware clattering, conversations humming, life happening in ignorance of how close it was to ending. Then Breer's expression hardened. "You're lying, trying to talk me down like I'm some suicidal patient who just needs validation. I'm telling you the truth. The truth is that nobody cares about maintenance workers or safety violations until people die. I tried your way. It doesn't work." His finger tightened on the switch. "So now, we do it my way. You're going to stand up, walk to the center of the cafeteria, and tell everyone exactly who I am and what I'm carrying. Then we're going to have a very public conversation about Crestview Memorial's safety record." Sarah's mind raced through scenarios. Compliance meant panic, stampede, potential trigger of the other devices. Resistance meant immediate detonation. Neither option left anyone alive. "There's a third option," she said. "I'm listening. You want accountability, want people to understand why you did this? Then let's do it properly. No hostages, no bombs, just you, me."
The media. "I'll stand beside you and confirm every safety violation you documented. I'll testify to the hospital's negligence, but you have to disarm first. So your police friends can arrest me the moment I let go of this switch. They're going to arrest you anyway. The question is whether you die as a mass murderer or survive as a whistleblower who went too far." Sarah leaned back. "You want to be remembered? Want your cause to matter? Then stay alive to see it through, because dead terrorists don't change systems. They just make headlines for a week and then get forgotten." Breer's jaw clenched. "You think you're clever, think you can manipulate me with logic. I think you're angry at people who deserve it, but you're about to kill people who don't." Sarah gestured around the cafeteria. "Look at them. Really look. These aren't the administrators who fired you. They're just people trying to survive another shift. Collateral damage. Is that what you called the 6 people you killed? Collateral damage?" Sarah's voice gained an edge. "Because I pulled Dr. Vance out of the rubble. I watched him bleed,
heard him scream, and he was one of the people you wanted dead. But the other 5? The administrative assistants and the night custodian and the patient who couldn't be evacuated, what did they do to deserve dying? Breyer's hand trembled slightly. They were in the building. They worked for the system. They worked to pay rent, to feed families, to survive. Sarah stood slowly, her hands visible and empty. You want to punish the hospital? Fine, I'll help you, but put down the switch first. Don't move. Breyer's voice cracked. Sit down, or I'll... You'll what? Kill everyone here? Prove the hospital was right to fire you? Confirm every accusation they made about you being unstable and dangerous? Sarah stayed standing. Or you can make the hard choice, the brave choice. Put down the bomb and fight the system the way it actually gets beaten, with evidence and testimony and public pressure. Around them, people were starting to notice. A nurse at the next table looked over, her expression confused. A patient near the coffee station paused mid-pour, sensing the tension. Through the earpiece, Foster's voice was urgent. Winters, what are you doing? Stand down. But Sarah kept her eyes locked on Breyer's face, reading the war happening behind his eyes. Rage fighting reason, desperation fighting calculation. The part of him that wanted
To burn everything down versus the part that still remembered being the person who fixed things instead of breaking them. Last chance, Sarah said quietly. Be the person who tried to save this hospital, not the monster who destroyed it. Breyer's finger hovered on the switch for an eternity, compressed into 3 seconds. Then, with a sound like something breaking, he moved his hand away from the device and placed both palms flat on the table. Okay, he whispered. Okay. The cafeteria erupted into controlled chaos as tactical officers stormed in from 3 directions. Weapons drawn, voices barked in commands. They swarmed Breyer, hands forcing him to the ground, zip ties securing his wrists, while bomb squad technicians carefully examined the device strapped to his chest. Sarah stepped back and watched them work, her legs suddenly weak, adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow. Around her, civilians were being evacuated with swift efficiency, police guiding them through cleared routes, while others swept for the additional devices Breyer had mentioned. Detective Foster appeared at her elbow, his face pale with anger, and something that might have been admiration. That was the stupidest, most reckless thing I've ever witnessed, he said. Did it work? You're alive. He's in custody. The bomb didn't detonate. Foster scrubbed a hand over his face. Yeah, it worked. But if you ever pull something like that again without authorization, you'll... What? Fire me? I don't work for you. Despite everything, Foster almost smiled. Fair point. The bomb squad finished their examination and gave the all-clear signal. The device was live but stable, and Breyer's other 3 charges were being located and neutralized. The cafeteria slowly transformed from crisis zone back to ordinary space, though everyone who'd been present would carry the memory of how close they'd come to dying. Patricia Wade found Sarah near the emergency exit, her face tight with emotion she was struggling to contain. You just talked down a suicide bomber, Patricia said. Technically, I convinced him to disarm voluntarily. Don't diminish this. You saved everyone in that room. Patricia's voice cracked. Including me. I was getting coffee when it happened. I saw you stand up and I thought... She stopped wiping her eyes. I thought you were going to die to make a point. That would have been stupid. That would have been heroic. Both can be true. Patricia grabbed Sarah's
shoulders. But you didn't die. You lived. And now maybe people will finally understand what you've been trying to tell us all along. Sarah looked past her to where paramedics were loading Breyer into an ambulance, officers flanking him like an honor guard for the damned. He looked smaller now, stripped of the weapon that had made him dangerous, just a broken man who tried to fix things by breaking them worse. He wasn't completely wrong, Sarah said quietly. About the hospital, about the safety violations. I know. Someone needs to investigate his claims. Actually investigate, not just dismiss them because he became a terrorist. Patricia nodded.
Then let's make sure that happens. By evening, Crestview Memorial had been fully evacuated and secured. All 4 devices had been recovered and rendered safe. Brer was in federal custody, facing terrorism charges that would keep him locked away for the rest of his natural life. And Sarah sat in Detective Foster's office, giving her official statement for the 3rd time, each iteration adding details she hadn't remembered in the shock of the immediate aftermath. The part where he mentioned safety violations, Foster said, reviewing his notes. He gave you specific incidents. The gas line that failed was flagged for replacement 2 years ago. The electrical work in the surgical wing didn't meet code. There were others. He rattled off at least 6 examples of corners being cut to save money. And do you believe him? Sarah thought about it. I believe he believes it. Whether the facts support his version is something investigators will need to determine. But I've worked here 6 months, and I've seen enough questionable decisions to know he's not completely fabricating. Foster made another note. The FBI will want to interview you. So will the State Medical Board. This is going to get ugly for Crestview Memorial. Good. Maybe ugly is what they need. You're not worried about retaliation, hospital administration burying you for making them look bad? They can try. Sarah leaned back in her chair. But I'm the combat veteran who saved lives during a bombing and then talked down the bomber before he could kill again. That's a hard narrative to spin negatively. Foster almost smiled. You've thought about the politics. I've thought about survival. The politics are just part of that calculation. A knock at the door interrupted them. Fire Marshal Torres entered without waiting for permission, her expression grim.
Preliminary investigation confirms Brier's claims, she said without preamble. The gas line was flagged for replacement. Multiple safety reports were filed and ignored. Crestview's administration has been systematically deferring maintenance to keep costs down, while revenue went to executive bonuses and facility cosmetic upgrades. Foster whistled low. That's criminal negligence, at minimum. The state attorney general is already opening an investigation, and the families of the 6 people killed in the original explosion are filing wrongful death suits with Brier's documentation as evidence. Torres looked at Sarah. Your testimony is going to be critical. You're an inside witness who documented concerns before the bombing. That makes you credible in ways Brecker never was. Sarah absorbed this. What happens to the hospital? Best case, management overhaul, massive fines, probationary status. Worst case, they lose their accreditation and get shut down. Torres pulled out a chair and sat. Either way, you just became the most important witness in the biggest medical negligence case the state has seen in 20 years. The weight of that settled over the room like fog. Sarah had wanted justice, had wanted the system to acknowledge its failures, but she'd imagined it happening quietly through proper channels, with minimal disruption to patient care. Instead, she just helped expose a scandal that would destroy careers, collapse an institution, and force hundreds of patients to find care elsewhere. I need to see my patients, Sarah said abruptly, before they get transferred, before this becomes about lawsuits and investigations and politics. Torres nodded. Go, we can finish this later. Sarah left the police station and drove back to Crestview Memorial through streets that looked different now, painted with the knowledge of how close everything had come to catastrophic violence. The hospital loomed ahead, no longer gleaming and prestigious, but shabby and compromised, like a beautiful facade finally revealing the rot beneath. Dorothy Mitchell was still in her temporary bed near the window, refusing transfer until she could see Sarah one more time. There you are, Dorothy said when Sarah entered. I heard what happened. The bomb, the cafeteria. Everyone's talking about how you saved them. I just talked to someone who was ready to listen. Don't do that. Don't minimize. Dorothy struggled to sit up higher. You risked your life again for people you barely. No, that's the job. No, the job is taking vitals and administering medications and following doctor's orders. What you do, what you've been doing since you got here, that's something else. That's caring when caring isn't convenient. That's fighting for people even when it costs you. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. The hospital's in trouble, Mrs. Mitchell. Real trouble. They'll probably transfer you to County General in the next few days. Better equipment, better oversight. Will you be there? I don't know where I'll be. This is going to get complicated. Dorothy reached out and took Sarah's hand. Then promise me something. Promise me you'll keep doing what you do, wherever you end up. Because the world needs nurses like you. Ones who see people instead of problems. Who fight instead of following along. I promise. They sat together in silence for a moment. 2 people who'd survived something they never should have had to face, holding on to each other like proof that survival meant something. Sarah made rounds through the remaining patients, checking vitals and updating charts, and trying to pretend that everything wasn't about to change.
Patricia worked alongside her, and gradually other nurses joined them, forming a temporary unit bound by crisis and the strange intimacy of shared survival. Around midnight, Marcus Holloway found Sarah in the supply room, restocking her medication card for a shift that might never happen. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "You already apologized. That was for dismissing you medically. This is for dismissing you as a person." Marcus leaned against the doorframe. "I've been thinking about what Breer said, about safety violations and cut corners, and I realized I've known about problems for years, equipment that doesn't work properly, protocols that get ignored when they're inconvenient. But I told myself it wasn't my job to fight administration. I was just a doctor. My job was treating patients. And now I realize that treating patients means fighting the systems that harm them, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you." He met her eyes. "You've been doing that since day one. Fighting for patients everyone else ignored, documenting problems everyone else accepted. And I dismissed you because you made me uncomfortable, because you reminded me that I'd stopped fighting and started coasting." Sarah sat down the medication she'd been organizing. "What are you going to do?"
About it. I'm going to testify about the safety issues I've observed, about the times I signed off on things I knew were wrong because it was easier than making waves, about a culture that valued compliance over competence. Marcus's expression was resolute. "I'm probably going to lose my job, might lose my medical license, but at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror again. That's brave. That's terrifying. But you've been terrified since you got here, and it hasn't stopped you. So maybe it's time I learned from your example." He left, and Sarah continued her rounds, feeling the hospital shift around her like a building settling into new foundations. Everything was changing. Everything had already changed. The only question was what would be built in the aftermath. At 2 a.m., Robert Castellan arrived with his attorney, his wife, and a determination that radiated from him like heat. "Miss Winters," he said, finding her at the nurse's station, "I heard what happened today. The bomber, the cafeteria, the investigation that's opening. Mr. Castellan, you should be resting. I'm done resting. I'm done being a patient." He pulled out a folder thick with documentation. "This is every communication I've had with Crestview Memorial's administration over the past 5 years. Complaints about care quality, concerns about safety, observations about staff being overworked and undertrained. I've been on the hospital's board of directors. I knew things were wrong and I did nothing, because fixing it would have been expensive and complicated. Why are you telling me this? Because you saved my life twice. Once when you diagnosed what everyone else missed. Once when you talked down a bomber instead of letting him kill everyone in that cafeteria. And now I'm going to return the favor." Castellan set the folder on the desk. "I'm funding an independent investigation into Crestview Memorial. I'm backing the wrongful death lawsuits, and I'm personally ensuring that you and anyone else who speaks truth about this hospital are protected from retaliation." His attorney stepped forward. "We're also prepared to offer you a position as Director of Patient Safety at the new trauma center. Mr. Castellan is funding full authority to implement protocols, direct reporting to the board, complete autonomy to fix what's broken." Sarah stared at them. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you power," Castellan corrected. "The power to actually change things instead of just documenting
Failures. The power to build a system that values nurses like you instead of silencing them." He smiled. "Interested?" Sarah looked around the hospital that had dismissed her, nearly killed her, and finally reluctantly been forced to see her. She thought about Dorothy, Mitchell, and the other patients who'd been invisible until crisis made them impossible to ignore. She thought about Thomas Breer and the rage that came from trying to fix something broken while everyone looked away. "Yes," she said, "I'm interested." Castellan extended his hand, and Sarah shook it, feeling the weight of commitment settle over her, like a mantle. Dawn broke over Millbrook while Sarah sat on the hospital's front steps, watching emergency vehicles depart and news crews pack up their equipment. The crisis had passed. The bomber was in custody. The investigation was beginning. And Sarah Winters, the invisible probationary nurse everyone had dismissed, sat at the center of it all. No longer invisible, no longer dismissed, no longer willing to accept a system that valued convenience over care. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "This is Thomas Breer. They're letting me make one call before transfer to federal custody. I wanted you to know you were right about fighting the right way, about truth mattering more than violence. I'm going to testify. Going to make sure everyone understands what I found, but I'm going to do it your way, through the system, with evidence. Thank you for showing me there was another path." Sarah read the message twice, then deleted it. Some conversations didn't need to be preserved. Some understanding happened outside official records. She stood, stretched muscles that ached from 36 hours without real rest, and walked back into Crestview Memorial to finish her shift. Because that's what nurses did. They showed up. They fought. They cared when caring wasn't convenient. And sometimes, just sometimes, they won. But as she pushed through the emergency department doors, Sarah saw hospital security moving through the building with unusual purpose. 3 men in dark suits stood at the nurses' station, their attention fixed on something she couldn't see from her angle. Patricia appeared at her elbow, her face pale. "Sarah," she whispered, "those are federal agents. They've been here for 20 minutes, and they just asked where to find you."
Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her pocket, where her phone held 6 months of documented observations about hospital negligence. Evidence that could destroy careers, testimony that could end an institution. The lead agent looked up and locked eyes with her across the emergency department. "Sarah Winters," he called out, "we need you to come with us. You're being placed under protective custody. We have credible intelligence that there's a second suspect. Thomas Breer had a partner, and they're coming for you right now." Sarah's training kicked in before fear could. She cataloged exits, cover positions, civilians in the line of potential fire. The federal agent was already moving toward her, his hand resting near his sidearm in that casual but ready posture. That meant real threat, not theater. "Ma'am, we need to move now." "Who's the second suspect?" "We'll brief you in transit." Right now, the emergency department's main entrance exploded. Inward, not with fire or shrapnel, but with the violent crash of reinforced glass shattering under the impact of a stolen ambulance that someone had driven through the security barriers at 40 miles per hour. The vehicle's front end crumpled against the reception desk, alarms shrieking, patients screaming, staff diving for cover. And climbing out of the driver's seat was a woman Sarah had seen every single day for 6 months, but had never really noticed. Linda Vasquez, night shift janitorial supervisor, 50s, quiet, the kind of invisible that came from decades of people looking through her instead of at her. She held a pistol in one hand and what looked like a remote detonator in the other. "Nobody moves." Linda's voice cracked with the particular hysteria of someone who'd already accepted they were going to die. "Nobody calls for help, or I blow the charges in the basement, and we all go together." The federal agents froze, hands hovering near weapons they couldn't draw without triggering exactly the outcome they were trying to prevent. Around the demolished entrance, patients and staff huddled behind overturned furniture and medical equipment, trapped in a nightmare that refused to end. Sarah stood perfectly still, her mind racing through connections she should have made earlier. Linda Vasquez, always working late, always in areas she shouldn't technically need to access, always watching. How many times had Sarah passed her in hallways without a
second glance? How many conversations had Linda overheard while pushing a cleaning cart through rooms where people spoke freely because janitors were invisible? "Linda," Sarah said quietly, "put down the gun." "No." Linda's hand shook, but her finger stayed on the trigger. "No more talking. No more chances. Tom tried talking, tried fixing things properly, and they destroyed him, fired him for telling the truth, ruined his career for caring about safety. Tom Breer was your husband for 22 years, 22 years of watching him break himself trying to keep this place safe while they treated him like garbage." Tears streamed down Linda's face, but her aim never wavered. "And when they finally pushed him too far, when he fought back the only way he knew how, you stopped him. You took away his chance to make them pay." The federal agent beside Sarah murmured into his radio, coordinating response teams, but Sarah barely heard him, her entire focus locked on the woman whose grief had curdled into something toxic and explosive. "Where's the bomb?" Sarah asked. "Basement mechanical room, right next to the main gas line. I've been placing charges for 3 weeks. Small ones, easy to hide in maintenance panels. Enough to rupture the line and turn this entire building into a fireball." Linda laughed, the sound brittle and wrong. "Tom planned the first bombing, but I'm the one who made it possible. Gave him access codes, showed him vulnerabilities, and when he got caught, I decided to finish what we started." Patricia Wade was crawling toward the emergency exit, trying to evacuate patients without drawing Linda's attention. Other staff followed her lead, moving with painful slowness, but the cafeteria was on the basement level. If those charges detonated, evacuation wouldn't matter. The explosion would take out the building's foundation,
and bring everything down. You don't want to do this, Sarah said. Yes, I do. I want them to understand what they took from us, from me. Tom's in federal custody, facing life in prison because he tried to hold this hospital accountable. But I can finish it. I can make sure everyone knows what Crestview Memorial really is, a place that values money over lives and crushes anyone who speaks truth. And the patients, the staff, the people who had nothing to do with your husband's termination. Collateral damage. Linda's voice hardened. That's what they called the people Tom killed, so that's what I'm calling the ones who will die now. Fair. Is fair. The lead federal agent was edging sideways, trying to establish a clear shot that wouldn't risk hitting civilians. But Linda tracked his movement with the gun, her finger tightening on the trigger. Don't, Linda warned. Don't make me start shooting before the bomb goes off. I'd prefer we all die together, but I'll settle for making this messy if you force me. Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself between Linda and the agent, blocking the shot, making herself the primary target. What are you doing? The agent hissed. My job. Sarah kept her eyes on Linda. You wanted me to understand what your husband lost, so explain it to me. Make me understand why killing innocent people honors his memory. Because nothing else worked. Linda's composure shattered completely. We tried everything. Complaints, documentation, lawsuits. We followed every rule, jumped through every hoop, trusted the system to care about truth. And you know what happened? Nothing. They fired Tom, blacklisted him, made sure he couldn't work in maintenance anywhere in the state. We lost our house, our savings, everything because he wouldn't sign off on dangerous conditions. I believe you. Don't patronize me. I'm not. I believe your husband found real safety violations. I believe administration ignored them. I believe he was punished for doing the right thing. Sarah took another step closer. And I believe you're about to destroy his last chance at vindication. Linda's eyes narrowed. What? Your husband is in custody, but he's also cooperating with investigators, providing documentation, testifying about the violations he found. And because he surrendered, because I convinced him to fight through the system instead of with more bombs, prosecutors are considering reducing his charges. He might actually survive this. Might get to see justice happen the right way. You're lying. Check your phone. He texted me an hour ago, said he was going to testify, going to make sure the truth came out. Sarah pulled out her own phone, navigating to Breer's message, and held it up so Linda could read it. He chose to live. Linda chose to fight from inside the system. Are you going to honor that choice or destroy it? Linda stared at the screen, her weapon wavering. He never told me he was cooperating because he knew you'd try to stop him or finish what he started. Sarah lowered her phone, but he made the hard choice, the brave choice, and now you get to make yours. Die here and make
him a widower in prison, or live and help him expose the corruption that started all of this. They'll arrest me. Yes, you'll face charges, probably serve time, but you'll be alive and your husband will be alive, and together, your testimony might actually change things, might force accountability, might make Tom's suffering mean something beyond body counts and trauma. Linda's hand shook harder now, the detonator trembling in her grip. Behind her, the federal tactical team had positioned themselves for a forced entry, waiting for the signal. One wrong move and this ended in blood, regardless of what Sarah said. I don't know how to live with this, Linda whispered, with what we did, with who we became. Neither do I, Sarah said. I don't know how to live with the people I couldn't save, the decisions I got wrong, the times I stood by and let bad things happen because speaking up was inconvenient. But I'm trying, every day, trying to be better than my worst moments. How? By showing up, by fighting for people who can't fight for themselves, by refusing to accept that broken systems can't be fixed. Sarah extended her hand. Put down the detonator, Linda. Let's fix this together, the right way. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, Linda Vasquez stood at the intersection of grief and choice, holding the power to end dozens of lives, or save them. Her face cycled through emotions too complex to name, rage and sorrow and exhaustion, and something that might have been relief. Then she set the detonator on the ambulance's hood and dropped the pistol to the floor. Okay, she said. Okay. The federal agents moved with practiced speed, securing Linda,
retrieving the detonator, coordinating with bomb squad to neutralize the basement charges. Sarah stepped back and let them work, her legs suddenly unsteady now that adrenaline had nothing left to sustain. Patricia materialized beside her, grabbing her arm to keep her upright. "That's twice in 2 days you've talked down someone with a bomb," Patricia said. "I really hope it doesn't become a pattern. If it does, we're putting crisis negotiator on your business cards." Despite everything, Sarah almost laughed. The next 6 hours blurred into a procedural nightmare. Statements, interviews, debriefings. The hospital was evacuated completely this time. Patients transferred to facilities.
Across 3 counties, while structural engineers assessed damage from the ambulance crash and bomb squad cleared the building room by room. Sarah sat in a borrowed conference room at Millbrook PD, drinking terrible coffee and watching the sunrise over a city that felt fundamentally different than it had 48 hours ago. Detective Foster entered carrying a folder thick with documentation. Linda Vasquez has been charged with attempted murder, terrorism, and about 15 other counts that'll keep her locked up for decades. The basement charges have been neutralized, and Thomas Breer's attorney is already filing motions based on his cooperation and Linda's confession that she assisted in planning the original bombing. Foster sat down heavily. This case is going to be studied in law enforcement for years. Lucky me. Actually, yes, you're alive when you shouldn't be twice. Foster opened the folder. But there's something you need to see. Part of Breer's cooperation includes full disclosure of everything he discovered about Crestview Memorial's safety violations. It's worse than anyone suspected. He spread documents across the table. Maintenance logs, inspection reports, internal memos, financial records, a paper trail of negligence spanning more than 5 years, equipment purchases deferred, repairs delayed, safety protocols ignored. All signed off by senior administration, including Dr. Richard Vance and hospital CEO Angela Reeves. "This is criminal," Sarah said quietly. "This is a federal case. FBI is taking over. Grand jury will be convened within the month, and they want you as a witness. To testify against the hospital that employed me? To testify for the patients they endangered." Foster met her eyes. "You documented concerns for 6 months. You have credibility, and after what you did yesterday, talking down 2 bombers and saving hundreds of lives, you're bulletproof. Nobody can dismiss you as a disgruntled employee or attention seeker. You're a legitimate hero with legitimate evidence." Sarah looked at the documents spread before her. Each page represented a decision someone made to prioritize profit over safety, to value convenience over care, to silence anyone who asked uncomfortable questions. She thought about Dorothy Mitchell, nearly dying from delayed cardiac care, about Robert Castellane's pericardial effusion that 3 physicians missed because they relied on outdated tests,
about the 6 people who died in the original bombing because a gas line that should have been replaced years ago finally failed catastrophically. "I'll testify," she said, "whatever they need." "Good, because you're about to become the most famous whistleblower in medical ethics." Foster smiled without humor. "Hope you're ready for that." By afternoon, the story had broken nationally. Combat veteran nurse stops hospital bombers. Crestview Memorial faces federal investigation. Systemic negligence exposed after deadly explosion. Sarah's face was on every news channel, every website, every social media platform. The quiet probationary nurse who'd been invisible for 6 months was suddenly the most visible person in Millbrook. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Media requests, interview offers, book deals, a documentary producer who wanted exclusive rights to her story. She declined them all and focused on the only thing that mattered, making sure the investigation had everything it needed to succeed. 3 days later, Sarah stood in a federal courthouse giving sworn testimony before a grand jury. She detailed every safety concern she documented, every violation she'd witnessed, every time she'd been dismissed or silenced or told to stay in her lane. The jurors listened with expressions that cycled from shock to anger to something that looked like shame. When she finished, the prosecutor thanked her and told her she'd done the right thing. Sarah wasn't sure she believed that yet, but she was starting to. 2 weeks after the bombing, Crestview Memorial's board of directors held an emergency meeting. CEO Angela Reeves resigned under pressure. Dr. Richard Vance was placed on indefinite suspension pending the federal investigation. Marcus Holloway was appointed interim chief of emergency medicine with a mandate to implement immediate safety reforms, and Sarah Winters received 2 offers. The first came from Robert Castellan, reiterating his proposal to lead patient safety at his new trauma center,
full authority, complete autonomy, a budget that would let her build something that worked instead of just documenting what didn't. The second came from the state nursing board, asking her to join a task force reforming medical safety protocols across all hospitals in the state. Advisory position, policy development, the chance to change systems instead of just working within them. Sarah sat in her
apartment now, actually, safe with new locks and police patrols, and read both offers while trying to figure out who she wanted to be, the nurse who built something new or the advocate who fixed what was broken. Patricia called while Sarah was still deciding. "Have you seen the news?" Patricia asked without preamble. "Which part?" "The part where 37 current and former Crestview employees have filed a class action lawsuit against hospital administration for retaliation and unsafe working conditions. I'm one of them. So is Marcus. So are a dozen others who watched you fight and decided they were tired of being complicit." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. "You're standing up. We're following your example. Finally." Patricia's voice was fierce with determination. "You showed us what courage looks like, what integrity costs, and we decided we'd rather pay that cost than keep our heads down and our mouths shut. I'm proud of you. We're proud of you. And we need you. Not in some fancy new facility or state advisory board, here, at Crestview, helping us rebuild this place into what it should have been all along." Sarah thought about that, about returning to the hospital that had dismissed her, that had almost gotten her killed, that represented everything she'd been trying to escape, but also the hospital where Dorothy Mitchell learned she mattered, where Marcus Holloway remembered why he became a doctor, where 37 employees found the courage to speak truth, where change was actually happening because someone had finally fought hard enough to make it impossible to ignore. "Let me think about it," Sarah said. She spent the next week visiting the patients who'd been transferred during the evacuation. Dorothy Mitchell was recovering well at County General, her cardiac condition stabilized and properly managed. She grabbed Sarah's hand when she arrived and didn't let go for the entire visit. "They're saying you might not come back to Crestview. Dorothy said that you're taking a position somewhere else. I'm considering options. Consider this. There are hundreds of patients like me who need a nurse who sees them, who fights for them, who won't accept a system that treats people as disposable." Dorothy squeezed her hand. "You saved my life twice. Once by noticing when I was dying. Once by stopping that woman with the bomb. Don't you dare disappear now. Not when we need you most." Sarah visited Robert Castellan next. He was home now, fully recovered, working from his study
on plans for the trauma center that would bear his wife's name. "Miss Winters," he said, offering her a seat, "have you made a decision?" "I have. I'm honored by your offer, truly, but I can't accept it." Castellan studied her. "May I ask why?" "Because building something new is important, but fixing something broken is harder. And Crestview Memorial is broken in ways that need someone willing to stay and fight from the inside. Someone who knows where the cracks are because she's been living in them for 6 months. You're going back. I'm going back. Not as a probationary nurse, as director of nursing with full authority over patient safety protocols and staff training. Marcus offered me the position this morning. That's a demotion from what I offered you. That's the fight that matters to me." Sarah smiled. "But your trauma center is going to need excellent nurses. Let me help recruit them. Let me make sure the system you're building doesn't make the mistakes Crestview did." Castellan laughed. "Done. You'll have my full support, financial backing for any of the first time in months." 6 weeks after the bombing, Crestview Memorial reopened with new management, new protocols, and a new culture that Patricia Wade described as uncomfortably honest, but finally functional. Sarah stood at the nurses' station on her first official day as director of nursing, reviewing the updated safety protocols she'd written personally. Every concern she documented over 6 months had been addressed, every violation had been corrected, every voice that had been silenced now had a formal reporting channel with mandatory investigation requirements. Marcus approached with 2 cups of coffee, handing her one. "Ready for this?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." "Good answer." Marcus surveyed the emergency department, which looked almost normal again, despite the lingering construction on the damaged sections. "I've been thinking about what you said during the grand jury testimony, about how systems don't change because of heroes. They change because ordinary people get tired of accepting dysfunction. I remember. I think you were wrong about the heroes part.
Marcus met her eyes. Heroes don't have to be flashy or dramatic. They just have to show up.
Keep fighting. Refuse to accept that broken things can't be fixed. You did that, and you showed the rest of us how. I just did my job. Exactly, Marcus smiled. That's what made it heroic.
Emergency department doors opened, and the first patient of the day arrived. Elderly woman, chest pains, frightened but trying to hide it. The intake nurse took her information and began the standard workup, but Sarah watched closely, making sure every protocol was followed, every concern documented, every voice heard. Patricia joined them at the station, reviewing the patient board. Full house already. Some things never change. Some things shouldn't, Sarah said, as long as we do them right. Over the following months, Crestview Memorial's transformation became a case study in institutional reform. The federal investigation resulted in multiple convictions. Angela Reeves and 3 other administrators received prison sentences for criminal negligence. Richard Vance lost his medical license permanently. The wrongful death settlements totaled millions, forcing the hospital to establish a victims fund and implement mandatory safety audits. But more importantly, the culture changed. Nurses felt empowered to speak up. Physicians listened when they did. Safety concerns were addressed immediately instead of deferred indefinitely. And slowly, painfully, the institution that had almost killed people through negligence became the kind of hospital where patients like Dorothy Mitchell got the care they deserved from the start. Sarah moved through that transformation as both architect and participant, building the system she'd wished existed when she started. She hired nurses who'd been overlooked by other hospitals, veterans like herself, older women who'd been dismissed as past their prime, men who didn't fit the stereotype, anyone who'd ever been told they weren't quite right for the job. And she made sure every single one of them knew they were seen, heard, valued. 6 months after reopening, Sarah received a letter from Thomas Breer. He was serving 20 years in federal prison, but his cooperation had resulted in a reduced sentence with possibility of parole. The letter was brief. Miss Winters, I heard about the changes at Crestview, about the reforms you implemented, about the 37 employees who stood up because you showed them how. I wanted you to know that means something to me, that my anger, my violence, it led somewhere useful because you refused to let it just be destruction. I'll spend years paying for what I did. That's fair. But knowing that my documentation helped expose real problems and create real change, that's
something. It doesn't excuse the lives I took. Nothing excuses that. But maybe it means they didn't die for nothing. Thank you for seeing the truth underneath the terrorism, for fighting for justice instead of revenge, for being the person I should have been. Thomas Breer. Sarah filed the letter with the rest of her documentation from the case, then went back to work. There were patients to see, protocols to review, a system to keep pushing towards something better. 1 year after the bombing, Millbrook held a memorial service for the 6 victims of the original explosion. Sarah attended with the rest of the Crestview staff, standing in the back while families spoke about the people they'd lost. When it ended, several families approached her. "Thank you," one woman said, "for stopping the second attack, for making sure more families didn't go through this." "I'm sorry I couldn't stop the first," Sarah replied. "You weren't supposed to. Nobody expects one nurse to catch everything." The woman's eyes were wet. "But you showed up anyway, fought anyway, made something positive come from our tragedy. That matters." Sarah hugged her and cried with her and tried to believe that meaning could be built from loss. On the anniversary of her first day at Crestview Memorial, Sarah stood in the same emergency department where she'd started. Invisible, dismissed, probationary. She was none of those things anymore. Director of nursing, whistleblower, the woman who talked down 2 bombers and exposed systemic corruption. Someone people recognized, respected, listened to. But standing there in her scrubs, with a patient chart in her hands, she didn't feel like any of those titles. She just felt like a nurse doing her job, seeing people, fighting for them, showing up even when it was hard. Dorothy Mitchell had been discharged months ago, fully recovered, but she still sent Sarah cards every week with updates on her life and reminders that visibility was a gift, not a burden. Patricia had been promoted to assistant director of nursing and was already recruiting her own team of nurses who'd been overlooked elsewhere. Marcus had published a paper on institutional reform in emergency medicine that was being cited by hospitals nationwide. And Sarah,
Sarah was exactly where she needed to be. Her phone buzzed. Text from the state nursing board. Final offer. Lead the statewide safety reform task force. Full salary, benefits, national platform.
You've proven you can change one hospital. Help us change them all. Sarah read the message twice, then looked around the emergency department, at the nurses who trusted her, the patients who needed her, the system she was still building into something that worked. She typed her response. Thank you, but I'm staying where I am. Change doesn't happen from advisory boards. It happens in emergency departments at 2 a.m., when someone refuses to accept that broken systems are inevitable. That's my work. That's my fight. She sent the message and returned to her rounds. Because Sarah Winters had learned something in 6 months of being dismissed, 6 years of military service, and 1 catastrophic week of bombings, and courage, and choosing to stay when running was easier. She'd learned that power wasn't about titles or recognition or national platforms. Power was showing up, seeing people, fighting for them, refusing to accept that injustice was just how things worked. Power was being underestimated, and using that underestimation as leverage, being invisible until the moment visibility mattered most, being quiet until your voice was the only one that could save lives. And now standing in an emergency department that she'd helped transform from broken to functional, Sarah finally understood what she'd been searching for when she left the military and tried to start over. Not escape, not forgetting, not a fresh start free from combat memories. Purpose. The same purpose that had made her a medic in Fallujah, the same drive that kept her documenting problems everyone else ignored, the same stubbornness that made her talk to bombers instead of running from them. She was a nurse. Not the decorated kind, not the famous kind, just the kind who showed up and fought and refused to accept that people were disposable. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.